Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show.
The podcasters declare that this work engages with the following multiversal societies: Uterusic Hegemony, of Chirality, World of Levis, Trifidarian, and Cursive Brackens. Presented in adherence to Skiffy and Fanty guidelines regarding consequence and responsibility, with the intent to achieve a greater understanding of all simulacral phenomena, and to expand the bounds of Christogenstinian knowledge.
Fantastic.
So good.
Ridiculous. Well, I'm Shaun.
I'm Daniel.
And today we are joined by two wonderful folks, Craig Lincoln and Cadwell Turnbull, 2/5 of the authorial collective known as Darkly Lem, editors of the Many Worlds anthology, and now authors of Transmentation, Transience, the first book in a series of quote-unquote sweeping multiversal adventure and intrigue, coming out March 18th, 4 days from the time of this recording, from Blackstone Publishing. Craig Lincoln, by the way, is a writer of SFF whose short stories has appeared in various outlets, including Daily Science Fiction, and Cadwell Turnbull, who's been on this show before. Craig is the first time, and so welcome, Craig. Cadwell is an award-winning SFF author from the U.S. Virgin Islands. His short fiction has appeared in various places like Nightmare, Lightspeed, and Azimuth. And he's the author of the novels No Gods, No Monsters, We Are the Crisis, and The Lesson. And also there's another one that was announced, but we'll probably talk about that later. Both Craig and Cadwell are graduates from the North Carolina State University's Creative Writing MFA in Fiction program. By the way, that's a mouthful to say. That's a lot of words. And they're here, of course, to talk about their new book, Transmentation and Transience. So welcome, Craig and Cadwell.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Before we get into our discussion, a reminder to our listeners, please share your questions and comments with us about our show at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. If you aren't already, join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams every Friday at 7 p.m. Central to be part of our wild, wonderful, interactive live streaming format. Finally, be sure to join our Patreon and be a part of our special Patreon-only events on Discord and take part in Torture Cinema with us.
It's always fun. We might watch {MANY} again.
Oh, God, please. No.
Okay, so to get us started, either Craig or Cadwell, or you guys could figure out a way to double team it. Can you tell us a little bit about Transmentation, Transience?
Okay. Craig, do you want to do it, or you? I'll start.
Yeah, you start.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about it with each other, we kind of say that it's a multiversal workplace drama. There's some space opera in there, there's some fantasy in there. Because it's a multiverse, it is doing a lot of genre bending, playful stuff, which we had lots of fun doing. But really, it's like it's a Cold War novel. It's a conflict between multiple societies playing out over the course of 3 books, and this book is the beginning of that conflict that is going to build into something that we hope is going to be pretty awesome and cool and devastating.
Yeah, I guess I'll also add that it's kind of, the whole conceit of it was kind of started with Cadwell, but like the 4 others did a lot of kind of bouncing ideas off each other until it kind of just coalesced into something that was not really anyone's completely, but you can see pieces of us in all of it.
And so is there a genesis of the novels from the anthology that you did? The collection? The Many Worlds collection?
Yeah, it's sort of. So the collection was developed as like the launching of the multiverse that we have. Like, it's 21 authors at this point, if I'm correct, including our pseudonym, and we have dozens of stories now in this shared multiverse, hundreds of worlds. And so these novels were a kind of opportunity for us to take all of this stuff that we've kind of built up over these years that we've been working on this and putting it into this kind of cohesive story that ties everything together.
So one of the first questions I think we kind of have to tackle is there are a lot of people involved in this. And we have two of them here. I don't know how you would put everybody in the same podcast, but I mean, at some point we could experiment. And so I'm kind of curious from a writing perspective, like what is that process like for actually having that much input from so many voices?
And even before that, if you could just also say who those other authors are.
Yeah, I could jump in, I guess. The other authors are Darusha Wame, Ben Murphy, and Josh Yore. And they, I guess, like to touch on what the process is like, is we could probably say it's evolving as we speak. It's been a work in progress, so we kind of just jumped in and we found things that worked and found things that maybe didn't work as well. And we kind of iterated on that for the second book, I think, when we were working on that together. And the process was a little bit smoother, but mainly we're writing chapters on our own and then coming together as a group to put our own touches on each chapter so that the voice is more consistent and everybody feels like the things that are important to the story are present in the chapters.
I'll add a few things to that. So when we were working on the anthology, we decided that we would try one story with all of us in it, or as many of us as we could. And at that point, 5 people showed up. we worked on a short story together, and then we edited it together, and it worked out. It was one of those things where we didn't know if we would be able to pull it off, and then somehow it kind of coalesced into something that we actually all collectively loved. And it was like a really good starting ground for this kind of like long form collaboration that we're doing now. I also say that we worked on the first chapter of the novel together using the same process. So we opened up a Google Doc and we all just started typing. And it was quite chaotic to begin with, and then it kind of came together again, and we were like, this is something that could maybe work. As we continue to do it, it's been more and more interesting and complicated. Things break sometimes things run smoothly. It's kind of a day-to-day thing.
So one aspect of this is that there's a large cast of characters to the story, and events are happening kind of like in pieces all across in these different localities, right? But then certain aspects of the story start merging more and more together. It sounds like the division in terms of the writing wasn't ever broken up according to those characters, because each of those characters has a very distinctive personality, of course. The groups or the cultures that they're from have particular aspects to them that I could see easily, like one writer saying, oh, I'm really drawn to this group. Like, I can empathize with them. I'd be really good at writing them versus another one. But it sounds like it was much more of a mix throughout.
I can, I guess, speak a little bit. I think for the first book, there was a little bit of being drawn to one group of characters. And there was a little bit of that, but I feel like one of the lessons we learned from that was if everybody touches each part of the book in the other chapters, if everyone kind of touches each plot line or each kind of group or story in the book, that it seems to make us line up a little bit better when the editing starts. So that's something that's one of the things we kind of figured out as we went, I think.
Yeah, agreed. It was, I think that even in the first book, we kind of traded off characters, but it wasn't as intentional as it has been in the second and third book. We're in this unique place right now where the first book is coming out, we're doing edits on the second book, and we're writing the third. And so we've kind of, as we've gone on, we've gotten a lot better at this kind of like disseminating plot lines and storylines and making sure that everybody has their hand in everything.
So another aspect of this that it makes me think of is if you're building a world effectively together, writing a whole bunch of different characters, in this case, a multiverse with a lot of different cultures and different worlds. There's literally flying whales at one point, which really, really cool, by the way. And I guess like my kind of question is like, this reminded me of, people who like write for Star Wars, right? Where there is like a canon, as it were, quote unquote, or like a world consistency thing that it has to do, except Star Wars is massive and it's like probably 1,000 chimpanzees somewhere like arguing with people. What do you guys kind of do as you all are working together to maintain the kind of, I guess, consistency in your world? I don't know if consistency is even the right word, or is that not a thing that matters because the multiverse is, frankly, could be complete chaos if you wanted it to?
So I feel like I should jump in because I just did this today. Like I write essays to the group, like write little letters where I'm like, here's something I'm thinking, and here's a rationale for why I am thinking this. And then we kind of we discuss it and we hash it out, and we figure out how much we align with what each other is saying, and then we try to codify it. We're actually really bad at the codifying part. So we have a Bible that we see sometimes. It makes appearances. Sometimes we link to things in the Bible, but oftentimes where we say something in the room, and then all of us remember some version of it until later, and then we kind of rehash it again, and then we codify it.
Yeah, I think just to add on, I think we just get too really excited about the spitballing, and we don't think to maybe someone should write this down, like all this stuff. So sometimes we have to circle back and rehash the stuff we already hashed, but it's all good fun.
Great. So like, one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the book, Multiverse is fun to begin with, but I love that there is a multiversal political plot that is going on that involves people in different places trying to manipulate the political activity to get the outcome that they ultimately want, which requires actually an extraordinary amount of like knowing the people you're effectively manipulating in order to get that desired outcome. And this reminded me a lot of like spy novels to a degree, that like political intrigue. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about kind of designing that story here and dealing with the politics of these different cultures as they kind of clash and come to a head.
It's a really good question. You want to start, Craig?
I'm not sure exactly how to start, but I do know that like we had spy novels kind of in our head when we started approaching this, and Cadwell had already thought of the skeletons, I guess, of the societies and like what they're kind of broadly were trying to accomplish. And while that got fleshed out, we could see natural conflicts arising based on what their interests and goals were. And so I think Cadwell was also the one that decided like, hey, this might make for a cool Cold War setting or situation. So that's what we decided to do.
Yeah, I don't. It's one of those things where now things are kind of foggy. We've made so many decisions as a group and individually that like I think it was me and Josh that came up with the Cold War idea, but I don't remember when or where that happened. And so in the very beginning, we kind of moved around on whether it was going to be a set of novels or novellas or what it was going to be. But the thing that we knew it was going to be was Cold War, spy thriller, etc. Right? Like we knew that part, and we had like a rough outline of the societies. That was something that I brought to the group when I was forming the collective there was this meta narrative, but it was very like bare bones at that point. So there was a society of powers, society of activists, society of innovators, society of scholars, that kind of thing. So they didn't really have real names. They just had like what the focus of that society was. And the Society of Powers naturally became Burl Hurd. There was a Society of Criminals that became Famare, that kind of stuff. But the analogs have been sort of messed up as we've gone along. We've kind of added enough stuff to what those societies are that they're actually, I would say, radically different than their early inception, though they have some spirit of what the thought was that went into it.
What's really interesting about the novel to me was the fact that it seems to be a perfect logical flow between sci-fi sort of ideas and that spy novel, because spies are really about like being planted in a foreign society, taking on almost like an acting role of pretending to be somebody else, being in somebody else's skin, being in a proxy kind of condition. And you take that in a somewhat literal way now in terms of multiverses, of people hopping between universes and inserting into a society in a different skin in a way. So it really makes a logical sense and flows. And I guess it sounds like that grew from the logical flow of just constructing the novels. So that, I think that's really cool.
Thanks. Yeah, it was.
Sorry,
it was
no question.
I mean, it was a long road. It's actually every once in a while we'll be in a meeting and talking about something very specific, some crazy minutia that we've thought up, and we'll have a moment where we'll say, "It's wild that we've gotten all the way here." Right? It's just quite surprising. It's like sometimes I have to like pinch myself to see if it's real.
So here is a question based off of that, though. You sort of have this Bible, the idea of what the concepts are behind how this multiverse works and how people move between it. Are you, as you're writing it, coming up with all of a sudden like realizing the implications of that and saying, oh crap, what if this happened? Like, we have this sort of in our rules or happening in this story. What would be the implications of taking this further and putting that into the plot? Is that kind of how things have flown or flowed?
We've definitely hit situations like that where we were chugging along pretty well, and then we realize, oh, I think we need to, kind of pivot on something and maybe adjust it. And that's, I think, so I don't know if this has been brought up, but we meet like twice a week for an hour and a half on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And a lot of times those meetings turn into pretty spirited discussions about those kinds of things. And that's usually where they get, either resolved or just like brought out into the open, and then maybe we have to finish the discussion on like asynchronously or offline. But I think those meetings are really valuable for making sure that we iron a lot of that out before we're done with the drafting.
Yeah, I'll add that when we have these spirited debates, they're on various levels. Sometimes it's on a conceptual level, like the big picture stuff. Sometimes it's about the societies and what is going on with the societies or the politics of the societies. Sometimes it's plot points and sometimes it's character stuff. And it kind of, and we tend to, in a good way, get lost in the weeds no matter what level we're talking about. Sometimes it means that we are slow on something that we should be quicker on. But it's always, or most of the time, it leads to something that I think is actually really cool or interesting or exciting. I would say in our first book, there we were 2/3 of the way through working on it, and we decided that there wasn't enough plot, or Darusha did.
Yeah, yeah.
And they were right, and so then we had to come up with some. It was like all of these are side plots, these are not a main plot. So what's the main plot? And then we had to figure out what the main plot was, and it actually made everything come together even better. So sometimes that happens. As we were working on the first book, there was um, some questions I had that came up about proxies, and then I wrote like, I don't know, several essays about how I think proxies work based on what we were writing. And we've had this interesting kind of evolution when it comes to that subject over the course of the books, in what we think these things mean and the implications of those things that we didn't know at the beginning when we started working on.
Because, yeah, the book begins to even get into sort of the philosophical or the existential sort of implications of all of it, which is interesting. But I'll let Shaun ask some questions.
Well, I actually was going to ask about the proxies, because the scene that was going through my head as we were kind of talking was actually pretty early in the book, I think chapter 5 or 4, which is this scene with Madalena and Reg, where they're like in like a dive bar, basically, and there's a robbery, and I won't tell you much past it. And there's a casual line in there where Madalena basically says something to the effect of, like, the bot. I think it's in this scene, like the body, the proxy, like it's wandering off doing whatever its physical, like its habits basically were. And I thought that was a very creepy idea, that you could be off in another world, not even necessarily by your preference and choice, and you're over there, it's doing stuff. So, like, who is it? It's the question. Like, what is it? Is it you? Is it, my brain started breaking, and I have another question about that scene, but I hope you could talk a little bit about, like, the inception of the coming up with this idea of these proxies, and, like, teasing out that they're complicated meaning for life, I suppose.
Oh, man. I actually have, I don't know, like 5 answers to that question.
Are they contradictory?
No, not exactly. I mean, I'll start with the basic question of where did they come from. I think the proxies came out of this larger meta-narrative question of, like, what does the simulacrum do? So there's how much of this is, are we allowed to say? What are we allowed to say here?
Check the NDA.
So we have a meta-narrative that pulls everything together, and the proxies were a natural, like, outcropping of that idea, right? It was like, there's these universes, they're internally consistent. What would make a universe internally consistent while a traveler is passing through it? And the proxies, the answer, right? Like, a body that's internally consistent with the universe it's in, that the traveler then jumps into, right? And from there, it kind of grew and grew and grew. Now it's like we have debates about what the proxy is, and we have agnostic theories. So, like, things that are like, some of us think one way and some of us think the other way, but here's how we're going to treat it when we write about it. Which is quite interesting and messy. And so, yeah, that's where it came from. And it's been changing ever since. It's actually a really fun, cool part of the story.
The fact that you guys could have different ways of viewing it in a consistent way in how it's presented, but different ways that you might approach it in your minds, means that, if you're in my position as, like, the weird professor trying to figure out what a book means, right, you could end up in a lot of different places, and they aren't necessarily, there's no correct answer per se, because even the authors may have slightly different ways of viewing these things that could lead in some weird ways, which is fun and also gonna mess with my brain now.
Stressful. It's down to characters. We have debates over what we think is going on with a character, what we think the essence of a character is, and we don't come to an agreement. We just come to, like, a consensus on what the character is doing in the scene or thinking. Even if we disagree on the fundamental essence of who the character is. And so it's like that with characters. It's like that with societies. We don't all agree on what Burlhurt is and how we feel about Burlhurt. And so we kind of play those debates out as we're writing to each other, if that makes sense.
That, I think that shows in some way in the novel, and I'm saying that as a compliment, a good way, because that shows up in the characters then too. Because it shows how it's an evolving concept with them as well, because they're trying to figure out the situation, and they all have different opinions on what it means and what their society should be or what other societies are and such. So I think that works well within it all.
Yeah, I do.
Do you have thoughts, Craig, on this?
Yeah, please jump
What's
in if
that?
you've got any thoughts. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think Cadwell pretty much nailed it. That we all kind of definitely had more than one discussion about this topic, and I think like he said, the consensus is more about how to approach it, not necessarily if we see one-to-one about how they should or should not operate. But there's plenty of room for interpretation, which I think is good and makes it interesting.
I suppose to some degree, then it also makes it, from a writing perspective, kind of helpful, because it kind of, to bounce off what Daniel was saying, you can then write characters who don't necessarily share the interpretation of things that other characters that have been written do. And that could include a variety of things, because some of the characters do talk about, like, what are the proxies? What does that kind of mean? And we may not necessarily get like the firm absolute answer, which is kind of also how reality works sometimes. But you could get these like debates among characters about how we interpret these different situations, which must make it kind of fun to sort of write all of these different characters with completely different cultural values and beliefs that won't see the world the same way. You can sort of interrogate almost anything from so many different point of views, potentially.
Absolutely. I think the extra wrinkle is that these characters are also traveling between universes, and they're experiencing subtle changes. There's this idea in the novel that one of us kind of came up with, self-sickness, like missing your original self, because they're moving through all of these different universes, and sometimes they don't return to their original body. And because of that, there's this kind of like longing for who they once were, even though they're the same. They just happen to be in this different context and person. And I think it's like, a very cool idea that we should explore more as we work on these things.
I agree. And I will say, as somebody who was told by his personal trainer, you walk wrong, and have now been like relearning walking correctly, you made me immediately think of there's this like concept of like the mind-body connection, where like if you're supposed to like do a sit-up, right, certain muscles are supposed to work to do the sit-up properly, because otherwise the wrong muscles are working. And so sometimes your brain and your body are not like linking together, and so a muscle group that should activate doesn't. And so you making me immediately think of like the something you're doing here is almost like you're taking that to the next level, which is, yeah, the mind is the same, but there's some additional connection that's there to the body itself. And I'd imagine if we could move around in bodies, that would probably mess with us mentally to some degree. I've never done it, so.
For sure. I should call out Ben. I think it was Ben that came up with this self-sickness idea. And there's this really beautiful scene where a character, Shaun, is talking to Meryl, and they're talking about this traveler that used to love this game, but once he moved out of that reality, he fell out of love with the game, because there was all of this cultural stuff that made him love the game that he lost, which I think is, just super cool. As we've been talking, I just had another idea about proxies. So this thing is endless. It might be an essay in a few days.
All right, I'll be ready
All
for
right.
it.
So with the proxies and the traveling, in some ways we're talking about like a separation, I guess, in my mind, between consciousness and biology. And there's a bit in the book, at least once, where it sort of talks about this not being unique to just humans, perhaps, or not just people, but more broad to that. So would you say that it's something that happens across life, or is it conscious life, or...
He's
Or
asking
do you
because he's a
not know?
bacteria guy. He's wondering if the bacteria also do
Can
this.
bacteria change into multiverses? Yeah. Can your gut microbiome go with you?
Cadwell, was the bird thing in the book for one?
Yes.
Yeah,
it was the bird thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've played with that a little bit. I don't think we've gotten down to the bacteria level, but there is like the I don't even know if it was conclusive whether the bird went or not in the book. But,
No, it's open-ended, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, I like to think they do, but I don't know.
Yeah, that was actually in the Shaun Merrill section. I'm remembering now. Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that we've debated. You know, you're all stumbling. All these questions are stumbling on our big major blow up debates. So we know that sentient beings can travel, and we kind of speculate that animals and stuff can travel too. We don't confirm it in the story, but we kind of heavily imply that that's true. People can travel. We had a pretty drawn out argument about objects and whether or not objects can travel. And we kind of we made a firm rule, but there's exceptions to the rule, and there's an exception to every rule we make. So yeah.
So there's actually a question in chat, since we're just like poking your brains about writing as a collective. And the question is, what does death of the author mean when there's a Bible, quote unquote Bible, for the shared universe that's a still evolving agreement between the co-authors? This is from Trish.
Clearly, we've thought about that. Not really. I know, like our agreement for the books. I think that's like the one thing we signed, right? Or did we sign another for just multiverse? And I don't think we did, right?
We have a consortium agreement for the multiverse itself.
That's right.
And that's true. Our Bible is constantly evolving and changing, and we edit it. Which is funny because we talk about editing as like a thing that happens on a cosmic level to reality. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about the whole death of an author idea generally. I think that maybe the author just goes in another room is how I think about it when readers and other people interact with a work. I think the author is still alive and they have their own feelings. I think when it comes to a group, is as you said, right? We just have differing feelings about the same thing, that we just have a consensus about how it's working on the page. We agree on the words themselves.
So could I ask, so that scene, that chapter I was talking about, where they're in the dive bar and it's Madalena and Reg talking together. I don't know where the idea for this scene came from, but it immediately made me think of Pulp Fiction when they're in the diner. Not least of all because they mentioned going to another location with like a coffee shop instead, but also just the way they're talking, and Reg in particular, the like attitude he brings when one of the robbers is like getting in his face. And it made me think, I mean, it's different language, but it made me think of that scene. And I don't know if that was an inspiration. And so I'm kind of curious about the design and makeup of that sequence itself, because it was very fun.
We've kind of been playing coy about who wrote what. And so it's interesting. You ask a question that we may or may not be able to answer depending on whether or not we wrote that section. Craig, you were going to say something.
I was gonna spoil who wrote the section, but I don't know if I should now. Should I?
I mean, why not?
I know Ben wrote that scene, and I think, I mean, the whole novel's got a bunch of playing with genre angles that we're approaching, and playing with genre is definitely an intention there. I can't speak to whether Ben was directly inspired by Pulp Fiction, but I'm sure there's a chance that he was. But it was definitely a choice to engage with genre playfulness in that scene, I think.
But I guess
there's
that
a very good chance.
Go ahead, please.
No, sorry. I'd say there's a very good chance. I think he's a fan of Pulp Fiction.
Okay.
I don't know about Tarantino in general, but
interesting.
I continue. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. So I guess to like twist the question a different way, since you kind of mentioned the playing with genre, and it is something we kind of very briefly talked about a little earlier, but there are, very kind of obvious science fiction elements, and then things that kind of push the envelope a little bit to strange. I mentioned like the flying whales, for example, which are kind of described almost like they're scientific, but then there is an element of horror that's described there because the characters wonder why the whales hang around the people all the time, even though the people keep killing them. It's because there's apparently something worse out there that is beyond human comprehension. And so in trying to like create a multiverse and having so much potential to sort of, I guess, quote unquote, break the rules, how'd you guys kind of really tear apart all of the possible incarnations of genre that you could really do here? Spy novels, fantasy, horror. There's elements of horror here. Classic. You said space opera earlier. There's kind of a lot that you could potentially do, and I find that very interesting. I guess I'll poke it at you, Craig, first because you're the one that mentioned the genre messing. Yeah.
Just to make sure I understand the question, are you saying like how do we decide which ones we engage with since there's so many?
Or I guess just thinking about what genre I guess means to all of you in the process of writing this, because it is kind of pushing the envelope in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I guess like I mean genre, I think means a lot to all five of us. I know for me personally, I grew up as a Stephen King person when I was a kid, and kind of just read nonstop Stephen King. And he plays a lot. I mean, he's a horror writer primarily, but he does a lot of science fiction and fantasy too, and melds them together. So I found myself drawn to fiction from that angle, where you can kind of dip your toe in multiple puddles, if so to speak. And I think that's, since we're all kind of interested in that, it's kind of just naturally where we went. And Cadwell's conceit of the whole universe thing, initially, like I think that was one of the tent poles, right, Cadwell? Playing with genre?
Yeah. I think the intention has always been that all of these different universes would exist in different genres, down to even like the style of the milieu, the tone, all of those things would change and shift depending on the universe they're in. And we've just, as we've gone on, that has become a bigger part of what can we play with now? So we have like, I'm trying to hesitate from spoiling anything, but like
It's so hard.
Yeah, in book 2, which we've been revising, we have like a wizard western, right? So we're doing a lot of like genre smashing together, right? Steampunk gangland, and for a while in our like outlines, we have things named by the genre mashup that we're doing for that particular chapter, and then we develop all of the story within those confines. And so we've just gotten more and more experimental as we've continued.
Do you know where the flying whales come from? I'm just curious because I love the flying whales. I've mentioned them like 12 times now because flying whales are so cool.
They're on the cover too.
Yeah, they are. They're individual. They're one of our inventions. It's a Ben invention.
Okay.
I'll just go ahead and just throw him under the. Is it throwing him under the bus to praise him?
I mean, I think just throwing him up in the air to be
Yeah.
celebrated. That's okay.
like the whales.
Right.
Yeah, no, it was a Ben thing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, he gets 5 points then.
Okay.
So, have either of you seen Everything Everywhere All at Once?
Oh my god.
Oh, no.
I'm just curious if that, like, after having seen that, did that influence this in any way, or not so much?
I mean, it terrified us. Like it caused us to have like a panic spiral a little bit.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
because
no.
we started working on it. So one of the things that we would do as we were working on it, because we have a Discord, is we would share links to things that we're watching, things that we think are doing something really interesting, that sort of thing. And sometimes we would draw inspiration from that stuff for sure. Where we seem to all, or most of us seem to be really huge fans of Severance. So we have a lot of Severance conversations. Everything Everywhere All at Once popped up, like when the trailer popped up, I think it was Josh, one of us put it in the chat and he was like, uh-oh. And then we all watched the trailer and we were like, damn. Because we had already started working on it. It's just to have it, like, and the concept, was like at least a couple years old by the time the film came out. And so we all, or most of us, immediately went to watch it to see how close it was. And it was terrifyingly close in some ways. It was like, what's going on? We had like is this like the simulacrum moment? Like, is reality playing with us? But sometimes that just happens, right? Like, ideas, it's a multiverse idea, right?
There's similarities, but there's a lot of differences, yeah.
Yeah, I think our fight scenes were a little different in that movie, for sure.
Oh, yeah. But there is, I'd say that your book does have, kind of like that movie, a really good balance between serious moments and moments that are really kind of absurd or comedic, that have a humor to them. And so did that just come naturally? Or during the editing process, do you like try to plan out that you're mixing things up, or does that go with the genre mashup? I'm thinking, God, I have to look up the character's name now. The buffoon / hero, Captain Elvery, is one moment where I kind of thought of that, where it comes right after some moments that are actually quite poignant, and then you have something that's also kind of silly and fun.
I want to say something, and I'm just kind of like playing in my head what our conversations are going to be like once the rest of us watch this podcast.
Yeah. What trouble are we going to get into, you mean? Like,
yeah. They're like, you should not have said that. Why did you say that? I'm dying to talk about the fact that, like, Captain Elvery. So that section, we had like very explicit conversations that, like, here are all of these travelers. Their plot lines are converging, but they just happen to converge on like a space show analog, right? It's a TV show universe, right? Like that's like the subgenre genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is the finale. It's like the season finale of that TV show that they happen to just cross as they're doing their own stuff, right? And so Captain Elvery is that, like, he's kind of like a parody of like the space captain, right? Like that guy, and he's doing that guy moves. Like he's like against all odds. He should be dead, but he's just like ha-haing his way through, action scene after action scene. And the travelers are like, what's up with this guy? And it's because he's like in his own show, and so it goes down to that level. We're having conversations of like not just playing with a particular subgenre of sci-fi or fantasy, but like what medium are we playing with?
an element there of a universe that is stable because it has plot armor for some of its characters.
Yes.
I don't know that anybody's done that before with the multiverse. That's kind of weird to think about. Because if you have a multiverse, theoretically, anything, I guess, could be possible. And so you could have...
I'm holding myself back from saying so much more. I was just... I mean, we're all the way in book 3 at this point, and so we're kind of doing the same kind of like, what's the mashup now? And I've been playing with this like video game universe, right? So like it's just video game rules, and so they come in, and it's strange to them because things are working in a very video game way. But I think the fun part of the project is that we don't necessarily come right out and say those things. We just treat it as if it's normal for that world and have the characters kind of hit up against those moments.
When you guys are kind of going through like you're writing a story, you're coming up with an idea, how do you know if it's too much? Because like the multiverse, like I said, right, is potentially infinite possibilities. But maybe some ideas are too bananas, or is that not in your like kind of implied rules, as it were?
I think that's kind of the strength of having 5 of us, because there's a lot of sanity checking going on as far as like, are we kind of going too crazy here? And some of us will kind of say, yeah, maybe we should pull back here or there, but we kind of get to a pretty close agreement with how we want to present and what tone we want. And I do think that's the strength of having 5 people involved.
Yeah, I'll say that we debate heavily even on the use of certain words and whether or not we think that's whether or not it's too much or not, right? And so like I think that we've all individually been pulled back from the brink from the rest of us towards some kind of like happy middle. Like we try to ground, even though we're doing all of the genre playfulness, we're trying to ground it. And so we kind of hash that out in the room and come to some consensus of like what's a decent, reasonable version of this thing that we're trying to do.
If you have Ben on here sometime, you should ask him about the word okay.
The word okay?
All right.
Oh.
Okay.
Okay, we'll have to hang on to that. Is he gonna get mad at you for mentioning that?
I hope not. We're gonna find out in a few days.
I'm probably gonna get in trouble for the TV show thing or the video game one. I don't know because that's so far ahead. There's no spoilers in that. That's just like
it's a
conceptually
concept.
What we're thinking about.
Yeah. It's still really interesting. So it seems to me that in having 5 voices, there's almost like a moderating effect where I guess like if you had 2 people, there's the potential for like an argument to get so aggressive that maybe like we're too different. But with like 5 people, you're all kind of moderating together. And I think Craig, you said like the word coming to consensus, which I don't know if 5's the magic number, but it seems very interesting that is kind of the narrative we're kind of hearing here about how you guys come to those agreements is by having these voices. Everybody brings these ideas in, and then maybe some ideas don't work, but then you kind of say, okay, well, how do we make this work, rather than just sort of, no, that's too much. We just like, how do we make it fit within what we're trying to do? I find that very interesting, and you guys should write a book about collaborating at some point, because you probably have some wisdom to share.
Publish the essays.
Yeah.
We've talked about at least writing an essay about collaboration and how we do it. I'll say that if there's one recommendation, I think having an odd number of people is super helpful. So maybe not 5, it could be 3, right? And if you go higher, it should be like 7. Even numbers, I think you run the risk of people are just kind of forming even camps. There's always a tiebreaker with us. And we kind of sometimes force someone to be a tiebreaker.
Yeah, like I'm guilty too of trying to hide in neutrality. If there's like a heated discussion, I'm not like super, like, I mean, I could see both sides, either side. I'm not, but sometimes if there's two versus two, that the person that's maybe not feeling strongly will be asked to make the judgment call there, which is helpful. And I mean, generally we do try to like accommodate everybody's concerns. We don't try to like completely override people. We try to bring in as much as what everyone's bringing as possible, but sometimes there's just, we're at a crossroads and there's got to be a decision. And the nice thing is once the decision's made, it's okay, let's move on. We don't have to,
Okay.
So for the tagline to the episode that I started, I kind of alluded to the opening of the book, where this is presented as sort of like a historical document outlining the past of these societies and what currently the simulacrum is. And so when did that become a part to like prelude the book? Was that a later edition? And then I guess my other question regarding that is, I don't know if you can answer or not, is are we going to get fully up to that present day? Or to sort of show how you got from this history to what it is as it's presented in the nonfiction type intro?
I think I know the answer to the first part of the question.
Okay.
I think that the prelude came later because I think we stood back and realized we have a kind of a bananas amount of characters in the book. And I don't know, Cadwell, do you remember whose idea of the dramatis personae was?
I think maybe it was an editor's suggestion.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that came along with that, right? Like, because we wanted a way to introduce it, or was it? I think that was right. I could be misremembering.
It might have been that the framing, the contextual notes and declarations was a framing narrative that we talked about when we were plotting out the entire series. But I'm not sure either. This is what we're talking about, right? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know when anything happened. Yeah, but I think one thing I can say about the history stuff is we've had conversations about the histories of societies, and so in the Bible, it's very inconsistent. For some societies, we have long histories. In some societies, we have like implied histories that are not like kind of gestural. It depends on like who was working on the history for that particular society. And then we also have this idea of like how the relationships across societies have changed over time, over like hundreds of years and thousands of years and that sort of thing. Some of that isn't like firmly set in stone, but we know and we generally agree on where things are headed. And we want to write stories that are set in different parts of the history. So like ahead and behind. And sometimes when we work on short story projects or novellas or other collaborations that are not the trilogy, we kind of decide as we're working on those projects where it falls in the history. Right. So some of it is emergent, some of it is like bottom up, and then some of it is like top down.
So I have one more before we gotta wrap up and let you guys go back to your lives, which is kind of bouncing off of this, because in framing this as a history, there is a conversation this book is kind of having about how we kind of tell histories and the perspectives that contribute to those histories, because we don't necessarily always get perspectives in this story that are giving us the full picture. And I think very early in the book, this becomes very clear when we have this council meeting And I think it's Duncan who's like constantly looking around and trying to figure out what people's facial expressions mean, because they may say one thing, but what they're thinking behind their head is not necessarily what their face shows. And this is a thing that the book kind of comes back to in a variety of ways, where characters don't always tell us, and which as they would do, especially in something with spy leanings, don't necessarily tell us the full truth. And since your narrative, the narration itself, doesn't necessarily go into all of their heads, that means that we're relying on other characters to interpret what they think other characters' motivations, desires, etc. are. And so in framing the story, those elements now become not just, simple ideas about like a thing we would do in any story, but now a matter of, well, which history are we now being told? I suppose is kind of what this novel is starting to explore. I realize that's not a question, so just pretend I put a question mark on there and just talk about that idea.
I mean, yeah, I think Craig, I'm sure you have things to add to this. I think ambiguity is a huge part of the project because it allows for, it's kind of a thing that has made the narrative and the meta narrative work, but it also has allowed us to work with each other. And so we kind of revel in ambiguity, and we have conversations about how can we make this more ambiguous quite often. And the only times that we pull back from that is when we're like, well, we're trying to have people actually read this book. And so then we try to curb that impulse by being explicit about at least what the plot is doing and what the characters are doing, and what specifically they're saying. But there's a lot of places where if you ask any one of us, like, why is that there? And then we'll just shrug. And then we will figure out on the spot what it means. And I think, this is true in an individual mind. I think it's like compounded or, blown up when you think of like 5 different minds doing this together.
Yeah, I mean, I in some ways the ambiguity gives us space to operate, and in some ways, sometimes when we're ambiguous, we do have like a pretty solid idea of what's going on, but other times it's less so, and that it's kind of like the nature of the universe that we're operating in as well.
I'm very curious to see where this goes, because the first book's very interesting and very good and a lot of fun. And I expect more flying whales in the next book. Thank you. Well, we have to wrap up. So we have a question that you guys actually could answer 2 different ways, because you're also individuals and a collective, which is, what are you working on next? And I suppose we could start with you, Craig. And we know you're working on the next book for this series. And so I guess if there's anything you individually are working on, or if there is also more Darkly Lem type stuff that might be coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, for Darkly Lem, definitely book 3. Individually, I'm finishing revisions of a novel I finished like late last year, and that is related to one of the many world stories on the website. So I'm wrapping that up, and hopefully, should be done in a month or 2. I'm hoping. We'll see.
Okay, fantastic. What about you, Cadwell?
I have a final book in a series I've been working on for a bit, coming out later in the year in September. A Ruin Great and Free. It's a part of the Convergence saga, and I'm also working on a collection that will be due to my publisher in August. So, and book 3 of this series, and book 2 currently, because we're doing editorial on it. So,
and am I correct, Craig? You say you're working on a novel for the Many Worlds project, so would that be a Craig Lincoln novel or a Darkly Lem? Because some of the stories have your individual names. So, yeah.
This is a Craig Lincoln short story and Craig Lincoln novel that I'm talking about. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And then, yeah, Cadwell, I want that next book, just let you know. You're going to have to give it to me. You know I like that series. That series is good. So.
Appreciate it. Almost there. In copy edits right now. It's like due next week.
So if the edits for book 2 are happening, when is there an idea of release for that, or is it too far in the pipeline to know or be able to say?
They're all a year from each. So like next year, this time around, hopefully, fingers crossed.
Okay.
And then will be the second book, and then the following year, same time around, book 3. If we get our act together and we get book 3 finished.
The drafting at least goes quickly because there's 5 of us, so we can divide and conquer somewhat.
Fantastic. All right, last question, and we'll flip it the opposite direction. Where can folks find you? So starting with you, Cadwell.
I mean, I'm on Blue Sky. My name, Instagram. I think it's Cadwell Turnbull author. Or maybe it's just Cadwell Turnbull. I'm on TikTok, though. I'm still trying to figure out TikTok, but I'm there. And my website, cadwellturnbull.com.
And then Craig, what about you?
Yeah, there's too many Craig Lincolns for me to get a .com, so I'm craiglincoln.net. And I'm on Blue Sky. I'm technically on TikTok, but I don't think I've ever done much other than look around and feel old because I don't really know how to use it. But in both places, I'm Craigabite, which with a Y, and yeah, that's it.
And then I guess the second question would be where to find the Many Worlds materials, as it were.
ManyWorldsForum.com has all of the multiverse stuff. So we have a podcast and a magazine. So we publish now. Kind of our publication schedule is quite patchy right now, but we have multiple. Sorry, go ahead, Craig.
I think there's one coming out tomorrow, right?
Yeah, there is one coming out tomorrow. On ManyWorldsForum.com, and we tend to have an audio version that comes out at the same time, often read by the author, sometimes read by one of us. It's kind of the advantage of having a collective. And we have an individual website, darklylem.com, right? For our individual.
I believe that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, for our individual collective, our pseudonym. And we have like a quite fun banner of all of us in a field staring out in different directions, our band photo, as we talk about it.
That's awesome. Well, thank you both very much for taking time to come and talk to us about this book. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Well, for folks at home, thanks everybody in chat, and thanks everybody at home who's listening. If you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode or tell us about the book, if you're watching the video, it's actually already on the screen, but now you get 2 versions of it on your screen. But there you go. You can talk about the book, skiffyfanty@gmail.com. Oh, there's 3, Ooh. And yours is shiny. Oh. Yours is shiny.
Yeah, I need to get that.
Yeah, this is the final version.
The real
okay, so I was going to ask this because I was looking at the book. It was like sitting like here at an angle, right? And I was like, why does it look like it would, if it was normal, it would be shiny or something? Because the way it looks from the side, and you're telling me the final version is like a little shine. Oh, man.
Yeah. It's like, it's so beautiful in person. It's really hard to take a picture. You can imagine. But it's gorgeous. They really did a really beautiful job.
Yes, it
Katie
is.
English at Blackstone.
Oh, wow. A+. Now I got to own that version too, because I only have the ARC right now, and it is pretty. Don't get me wrong. This art is fabulous, by the way. I should mention your cover artist, just out of respect, which is cover art and designed by Catherine Galloway English, by the way, which it is beautiful.
Incredible.
Yeah, and now I know there's a shiny version of the book, and so now I got to get that one too when it releases in 4 days from now. So I'm going to have to buy that too now. Thanks a lot. Okay, let me stop this show. skiffyandfanty@gmail if you want to let us know what you thought. We are on Blue Sky Threads, Mastodon, YouTube, all kinds of places. skiffyandfanty.com/skiffythings for all that. And then we do our live shows every Friday, 7 p.m. Central on Twitch at twitch.tv/alphabetstreams. And then please, if you like what we do and you don't hate us and moderately appreciate our existence, patreon.com/skiffyandfanty if you are so inclined. I am at ShaunDuke.net, or you can go to ShaunDuke.net/DukeThings if you want to find my stuff. I stream Wednesdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. Central for other things that aren't Skiffy stuff.
You can find me, Daniel, at Reading 1000 Lives on Blue Sky. That's the number 1000 in there, 1000. And my website, reading1000lives.com, for book reviews, as well as, of course, the Skiffy and Fanty blog for book reviews as well, and film reviews, and a bunch of other stuff.
Perfect. All right, as required by the Skiffy and Fanty bylaws, I have to make it happy this year. And so in order to do that, everybody is going to be very pleased to know that I am starting a brand new flying whales ride business that you will be able to find in Florida this June. Rides are $15.37 per hour. Whales cost a lot to feed. I don't know what to tell you guys. You're going to have to accept that. But you can ride a flying whale. And I will note you will have to sign a release because flying whales sometimes eat people. Because it's just interesting, you know? We can help get stuff out of their teeth and all that. So anyway, hope you enjoy that. And on that note, happy ending and see you.